The Les Paul Custom is my favorite guitar of all time, and has been since I was 12 years old. The three models currently on the market that I've got here perfectly exemplify why as soon as you see them. It's elegant in an understated way. I don't think there's a better looking guitar. So I knew I was biased coming into this because I like all of these. That's why I thought it would make sense to make a post when I got the Inspired by Gibson Custom model to field opinions and questions from others. What most people seem to be interested in is the sound, so I'll start there with the DI comparison first. Any differences between the neck pickups and this DI setting was not discernible to me. I've used them extensively through the years and they're all Alnico 2s, so I expected that. It is a different story for the bridge pickups though, so I'm putting a spectrum analyzer up for those if pausing and taking screenshots of that might help you compare them. The 498T is very responsive and a little quacky with the red bear pick I'm using, so I'm switching to a Dunlop nylon. The differences are pretty obvious between the white one and the two others to me, but there's subtle differences between those two too that might not stick out depending on what you're listening through. So what I've done next is played a chord and a single note on the Gibson and the Inspired by Gibson Custom, so you can at least see how subtle those differences are if you're not able to hear them. And it shows that the sustain between those two is exactly the same. I'll circle back to the Gibson in a bit, but at this point, with the most audible differences to me being between the two Epiphones, I want to dive into those first with standard tuning plugged in to a clean tone. There's clearly different properties to the sound of ProBuckers and the Gibson humbuckers in terms of frequencies, but one area they're both really strong is in dynamic response. They're both very responsive to pick attack, and that translates perfectly through the transients of both pickup pairs. And in my opinion, that's a very important trait for an electric guitar to have in order to do well with various styles of guitarist in music. Physical differences mirror the sonic differences of these guitars. For instance, with the Gibson and the IGC Epiphone, the Gibson has a little something extra. That is paralleled by the fact that the Gibson is about 1/4 of an inch thicker than the IGC. And then when it comes to the differences of the standard Epiphone, that's paralleled by some more drastic physical spec differences. When Epiphone overhauled their Les Paul Custom in 2020, they gave us the big split diamond and block inlays on an ebony fretboard with medium jumbo frets. The front of the neck is mostly where the similarities to the other two end though, long neck tenon notwithstanding, because the back of the neck is Epiphone's tried and true 60s slim taper profile. And that neck is attached to an all mahogany body, a spec in line with the earliest Les Paul Customs, but different to how Gibson evolved to do it. The Gibson Custom Shop model, and Epiphones inspired by Gibson Custom Shop model, have mahogany bodies with maple caps, and the necks attached to those are 50s rounded medium C profiles. They're presented as being the same, but they feel different to me. And looking at all three of the Les Pauls measured at the first fret on this contour gauge, I understand that they feel different because they are different. Of the three, my personal favorite is the Gibson. It has a blend of what I like about the other two. I say that as a person who prefers thicker necks though. Truthfully, I feel like the neck on the white standard Epiphone is what most people will prefer. It's very thin and comfortable and feels like more of a natural extension of the 12-inch radius of the fretboard. On the topic of fretboards, I'm happy with all three. The Gibson has the signature fret nibs and is flawless as I'd hoped for from the Custom Shopper USA. The Epiphones needed some attention before I started all this, as most new guitars do. The IGC model that I have is functionally flawless, but a little dirty with manufacturing debris. Now the board isn't too grimy, but the frets are scratchy on it. The standard Epiphone, on the other hand, had the scratchy frets, along with the most disgusting looking and feeling fretboard I've touched, and a tiny bit of pitting. In either case, the strings had to come off so I could get things cleaned up and the guitar is playing their best. I did my standard new guitar routine of using Music Nomad's Frying to clean the frets. It can be a tedious process or relaxing depending on yourself. For me, it was both, so I got lazy on the higher frets, but the process works just as well in getting things polished. After that, Ernie Ball's fretboard conditioning wipes come out. I coat the whole fretboard with it once to help when I use the soft cloth to scrub stuff off. Then I'll go through and do another coating that I let soak for a few minutes for conditioning before I eventually wipe all that away again. That's usually when I put new strings on, but I'm out of strings right now, so I had to use an Ernie Ball string cleaning wipe, which works very well. But now's probably a good time to ask that you use my Zounds affiliate link if you're feeling generous so I can stock up on strings. Anyway, yeah, that's what I did when the guitars came in. And then I matched my Gibson's neck relief to that of the two Epiphones because they came in set the same. I made sure the pickup heights were set the same, as well as the string height and intonation, so that everything could start as consistent as possible for the comparisons. And I want to address some specs that aren't different because some comments might suggest otherwise. First, the cutaway. The binding might throw people off, but the shape and the radius are the same by my rough measurements at least, and I have some comparison pics with the cutaways touching and my conveniently perfect sea salt spray bottle in the cutaway. The other was someone asking me if the space between the tailpiece and bridge and pickup are different, and they're not. They're the same. I guess the perspective of pictures can make it seem different sometimes. Hey, wanted to make a quick note of something. Sorry for the camera audio, but I need to capture this as it happened. So I'm sitting here and I'm dialing in the high gain for the drop C sharp part on the Pod Express, and I realize I need to switch to the 498 Epiphone because that's where I've been dialing in all the gain sounds with that, and then plugging in the Custom Shop and the white one and one after the other. When I get up to switch them, I saw the Epiphone sticker on the back of the headstock and realized this isn't the Gibson, it's the Epiphone. And that's interesting because internally, I've already decided by this point that I can tell them apart because the headstock angles are different. One's nitro, one's poly finish, and the feelings are different. That's why I've always been skeptical of those blindfold Gibson versus Epiphone tests because they feel distinctly different when it comes to neck shape and more noticeably the finish. But with the way the neck shape is on here and the way my hand prints and forearm prints have settled into this after playing it for a couple days, I'm going to snap a picture on my phone of this here. From the bird's eye perspective, while I'm playing it, I 100% thought it was the Gibson, and I think that is very, very cool. It caught me off guard. Anyway, I'll go ahead and get back to the playing now. anyone who's journeyed into the Gibson Epiphone comparison rabbit hole knows people always split hairs over these things. For comparative purposes, I have to do that too, because there are differences. There's the bridge hardware, which is the first thing differentiating playability between them for me. And I don't mean in terms of a Nashville ABR metric thing, I'm talking about the differences in quality. The bridge on both of the Epiphones is their standard tunematic, and they've got the same issues that 7 out of 10 Epiphones I've encountered have had. The string height at the saddles is all over the place. Fairly easy fix, right? You could file the saddles, but then the intonation on these have always needed more attention from me because the saddles tend to slide around on their own despite me using something like Tune It. So the more sensible solution, in my opinion, would probably be to change the bridge. There's tons of options. I can't recommend any because I haven't used them. It doesn't bother me, so in the past, I've just filed the saddles and adjusted the intonation as needed. I do wish they would have put the same bridge on the IGC Custom that they have on the 1959 Standard and 355. I'm grateful to Billy and Zounds to have had those sent out to me as well, and the bridge on them is perfect. The other thing is the switch. The standard Epiphone has one that's more rigid and noisier than the other two, as you've heard. If you're someone who switches between pickups a lot live, that could be a nuisance. Those are fairly minor differences you can change if you want. There's differences you can't change though that I've mentioned, and one is the body thickness. The other is the headstock angle. I haven't gone the clinical measurement route because the differences are obvious and I couldn't change them. With the thickness, it doesn't really matter for me because all three funnily weigh around 9 pounds, I'd say, which is heavy for the all mahogany one and kind of light for the other two. Now, Epiphone's headstock angle seems to be a few degrees less than the Gibson, and for the longest time I assumed that's why Gibsons felt easier to play, almost like the headstock is pulling the strings down so that the action can be lower, my fingers have to exert less force to fret. That very well could be the case, but with identical setups, I didn't find it to be noticeable. And me confusing the IGC for the Gibson earlier is evidence of that. It made me realize fretwork and nut slots have a bigger part in playability than I thought. All Gibsons, whether they're custom shops or USAs, are plecked, so those frets have always been flawless for me. I doubt the new IGC Epiphones go through a pleck machine, otherwise they'd mention it, but of the 5 I've had, a Firebird, this Custom, and a few others, fretwork is functionally immaculate on all of them. It's incredible and ugly. I want to show you, though, that neither Epiphone has any sprouting or sharp fret ends. The strands that were tearing off of the fretboard wipe happen because the Wonder Wipes are soaked in conditioner. Fibers fall off from the friction of rubbing the wood, hitting tooling marks on the binding, strings, pretty much anything. The frets weren't the cause of that. They're as smooth as can be. In the case of the standard Epiphone, though, they're not very level once we get past the 10th fret, so fret buzz was a problem with low action there. If you get one where that's a problem, it could be a fix as simple as tapping one fret down, or it could involve hammering or filing or both on several, which might not be something you want to do. If it's not worth the hassle to you and you order from my partners at Zounds, just let them know within 45 days you're not happy and they'll take care of you. You can exchange it or return it if you want. I've only had one Epiphone that I had to return. That was a Warren SG Classic in 2021. It's the worst guitar I've ever bought. Just unfixable. One Epiphone out of 18 is a rare occurrence anyway, but based on the experience that I've had with these inspired by Gibson custom guitars, I feel like it's going to be even more rare, if not almost non-existent in this range. They're getting extra attention to detail in the construction and quality control areas compared to the standard Epiphone range. Yeah, at the end of the day, these are tangible things that aren't immune to failure from a machine or a person. But with this IGC range and this Les Paul Custom in particular, my opinion is that the gap between Gibson and Epiphone has been filled as much as it ever could be. Again, people will always split hairs over these things, and that's totally okay. It's fun to want things to evolve and adapt. But this is the evolution for Epiphone that I wished we had when I was growing up. Something like the Orvals I read about that look the part and held up in craftsmanship. For me, they crossed that finish line the second I thought the IGC was my Gibson. I hope the standard Les Paul Custom isn't discontinued by Epiphone. Apart from it being a great price, it offers something the Custom Shop model doesn't, and because of that, I think it stands on its own or right beside the Custom. There's been times I've picked it over the Custom Shop model. One that comes to mind is when I was working on a track for CD Projekt Red, and I started out writing on a Silverburst I have, then I decided to record it with a Phoenix, and ultimately I felt that was a little thin. So I wound up splitting the work between the Phoenix and my Epiphone Koa Custom, because I think the ProBuckers really do work in any context so well. And if you like customs, you can get both Epiphones for less than half of a Custom Shop Gibson. And feeling and hearing how similar the Custom Shop and the IGC are, it's hard to make a case for the Gibson objectively, even though there are things that are perceived to be better about it, like the bridge hardware, the plugged frets, the thicker body, the nitro, and those are all things that I think are responsible for those subtle variations in sounds earlier, by the way. Whether any or even all of those things are worth the extra $4,000 is a personal decision for you to make. None of these are cheap, and they do all have their benefits and drawbacks. Even the nitro finish, it makes for a more acoustically resonant and, dare I say, harmonic guitar, but it's more prone to damage than poly. It can even melt on the wrong stand. And if you buy a white one, at some point, it may turn not white. What I want to say is this: Epiphones are great. They're the same quality being offered by other brands in the same price, like Schecter, the ESP, Jackson, Dunnable, Fender, Taylor guitars, everyone I can think of. But they get a hard time for all sorts of reasons, and some are legitimately fair concerns to have. In regards to quality control, I've said before, Epiphone has been the most inconsistent brand I've had. And some reasons are ignorant, like superiority complexes and even xenophobia, if we're going to be honest here. That's terrible. But it's unfortunately the way some people are. Some people will just never like Epiphone, and it doesn't matter. You can't make decisions for yourself based on what other people want. I'm just happy that there's these great guitars on the market, and the Custom isn't limited to one that cost thousands of dollars, and the old Epiphone penalty model, as I called it, with the weird tiny inlays and no ebony and the headstock and all of that. They've come a long way, and it makes me happy, and I feel like introducing the open book headstock on Epiphone symbolizes that they're now exactly what they should be. I hope sharing my experience and thoughts here has helped you decide what you want in some way. I've got affiliate links to everything I used in this video in the description. I want to thank Sounds again every chance I get. Everyone there means so much to me. And of course, thank you for watching. That means a lot to me too. I've got videos on the way for the ES355, 1959 Les Paul Standard, and the SJ200 from this inspired by Gibson Custom line if you want to subscribe to make sure that you catch those. Thanks.